Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you to my channel. Thanks for finding me in this quite crowded world of orchid YouTube care videos. Here on my channel, I try to grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia, without the help of any grow lights or greenhouses or humidifiers or any equipment. Really just me and them finding our own place inside or outside, or we can't play at all. So plant lovers of the world, if that sounds like your conditions, your no-nonsense conditions, do hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday. I am a complete amateur. Some ramblings are just that. Some end in the compost heap, but some might help you. And I've actually just been away for 2 weeks. I've been in the States, in Miami and New York on business. Un-orchid related, I hasten to add, and I've come home and it's very late autumn here, and ta-da, there are so many things in bloom, some of which are really exciting, others are predictable, and others a little curious. So I thought, you know what, let's just have a mixed bag of what's in bloom this late autumn. And given that we've alluded to this, we may as well just kick off with this Zygopetalum. The fragrance. So I've got it inside and it is the most glorious fragrance. Just trying to describe it for you. It's kind of like a daffodil with a hint of chocolate. That sounds disgusting, but this is really beautiful. So, can't get enough of that. This is my famous Zygopetalum. I made a rescue video about it because I bought it from a seller on Facebook Marketplace just after COVID. So I've had it for quite a few years. And when I bought it, I repotted it, and there was a lot of friendly concern about my handling of the root system. But people say Zygopetalum roots are sensitive. Well, they're really quite chunky and as tough as nuts, so I'm not sure where that comes from. I think most things want their roots to be handled quite gently. Anyway, I repotted it, and it didn't flower. And I moved it around. And you know, people can grow Zygopetalums and flower them in Melbourne like that. They're like Simbidiums, very easy. And a lot of nonnas grow them and then sell them in flea markets, which is kind of the version of this. And the lady I bought this from was growing it outside under a eucalypt tree. So it was getting pretty, you know, basic, tough conditions, rained on, winter minimums, and it would bloom every year for her. Not for me. And then last year, plant lovers, this time last year, almost exactly, it flowered. But then we had an incredibly cold snap just as the flowers were opened, and they must have had a little bit of moisture on them, and they burnt in the cold with the wet, and the flowers were really damaged. And I was devastated because it's taken years for me to get one zygote to bloom anyway. This year I have got 2 spikes, so this spike hasn't opened yet, this one has, and in fact I had a 3rd spike, but it was quite mature and something chomped the side of the stem. Not quite sure what it was. I'm not sure that slugs or snails could get to this because it's actually quite high, and it would be a very adventurous slug or snail that managed that. But anyway, something had a good chomp of the spike, and of course it died. But it avoided these other 2, and I did actually sprinkle some slug and snail pellets around just in case it was those beasts. But the other 2 spikes have sailed through. One is a few weeks away from opening, but this one is open. So there we go. Now, I'm not quite sure. The fragrance is heavenly. What it is, as it's a no ID. So I'm presuming it's a hybrid. And maybe one of you will have some further thoughts about what it is, but I actually almost don't care. I'm just really happy that I've got Zygopetalums to bloom. I did buy a couple of other named hybrids, one of which is doing really quite well and is probably getting close to flowering size. But anyway, I just wanted to share with you this amazing Zygo in bloom. As you can see, the leaves are very spotted. I'm going to do another video today, actually. I'm going to film it today. It'll go to air later on, about that whole leaf spotting issue. So many schools have thought about that. The most common being that it's water on the leaves, getting them wet and cold, and they just don't respond so well. I often think, you know, orchids get wet in the wild. I kind of don't know if that sits well with me. Anyway, maybe of course it's relative to your environment. I've spoken to growers who swear by the fact that if you keep water off the leaves, they won't get spotted. And I must say, I have tried to do that with mine, and I've just been watering the base, and the new foliage actually is relatively unspotted. So maybe there is truth in that after all. Now, the other thing about this zygote, look at that. Can you see the plant is literally climbing out of the pot? So My initial video about this was rescue and repotting. Well, now it needs to be repotted. In fact, it needs to be potted into a deeper, wider pot. And what I will do is ultimately just lift the plant out, plonk it in a new pot with a little bit of room around it so I can get some more medium in. Because as you can see, the roots have just grown right out. Amazing, vigorous, healthy plant. I'm just so thrilled it's flowered. Anyway, so I will be repotting this, and we might do a video about it, I think in spring when all the flowers have gone and the weather's a bit warmer. Anyway, Zygopetalum in bloom. It is glorious. I've made a video about this, so we won't go too much into care other than that it needs bright, indirect light, really similar conditions as Cymbidiums, hybrid Cymbidiums. It's outside all year for me, so it can take my cool winter minimums, which don't get to freezing, but pretty close. So 2 to 3 degrees centigrade can be the coldest winter minimum, which is the high 30s, low 40s Fahrenheit. We don't freeze, we don't get frost in the inner city. So this orchid sails through and loves it. Although, as I said, last year, there was an extreme snap of either very cold or very warm. I can't remember what it was, but it was extreme and it really just frazzled the flowers. But at the moment, we're in classic autumn weather. So chilly evenings, moderately warm days, and it's loving it. As am I. Okay, let's move our zygo friends so we can look at something else. And here we have a little charming beauty. This is Oncidium Suatuanum, and it's a species Oncidium, and it only flowers once a year. It flowers basically the same time every year for me, so late autumn, early winter. Sometimes it's May right now, sometimes it flowers in June, sometimes July, but anyway, it really depends which way the wind's blowing, I guess. And in fact, it's still a little bit early days. A lot of the flowers haven't actually opened, and when they do, it's just beautiful arching sprays of these lovely magenta flowers, slightly fragrant. There's a hint of that chocolate fragrance that you get from, say, Sherry Baby, those sorts of famous fragrant Oncidiums. But it's a real beauty, and you can perhaps see from the flower that it's one of the ancestor species for all the twinkle Oncidium types. Takes basically the same care as your average Oncidium. This does live outside all year for me, undercover, getting those cool winter minimums, but it loves life. I do try and keep this fairly moist all the time. It's not something that I allow to dry out too much, and it just keeps putting on amazing growth and flowers prodigiously every year. Very happy with that. So if you've got a lot of Oncidium hybrids, and you might have some twinkle orchids, then you might want to consider sotoanum, because it's like interesting variety to your collection, and the flowers are really small, but they're very beautiful, very prolific, and a lovely subtle fragrance too. So there you go. Oncidium Suatuanum, a species Oncidium that loves life and is doing very well for me this year. Okay, so we've got some really big orchids here, some really big flowers hanging around, but let's look at this little beauty. Can you see it? Nope. This is Gomesa Radicans. Now, that suffix radicans in any type of plant means that it sort of lolls along the ground and can root as it goes. So when the stem touches the ground, it can root and form a new plant. So that's often how they propagate themselves. So you'll see radicans cropping up as a suffix in many a botanic name. So Gomesa Radicans does just that. And it has these very lollopy rhizomes which develop roots, and it will root itself as it goes along. But it's the flowers. Look, can you even see them? I'll try and come in and do a close-up for you, but there they are. It's tiny, really, really tiny, sort of like an Oncidium type flower. And there is a sweet, and it is a bit honeyish, a sweet honey fragrance, but they're tiny flowers. So not really an orchid for one who might like large, flashy orchids. You know, if big cattleyas are your bag, then this might not be. It's more of a curio, I think, but particularly if you grow miniature or small orchids. Although I wouldn't say that's miniature. The flowers certainly are tiny, but the plant can be quite a vigorous plant. But it's a curious thing. It's really lovely. And interestingly, it grows on the sort of central east coast of Brazil, where it's described as intermediate to warm. Now, I bought this from a grower at a private sale, and she grows hers cold. When in Melbourne, that means outside undercover with no heating, which is my conditions. And she is further out from the city centre than I am, so her winter minimums will be quite a bit chillier than mine. Loves life, and so mine does as well. It flowers once a year at this time, so late autumn, early winter, and it flowers as your average Oncidium would perhaps. So you get a new growth, and then from that juncture of the new leaf, the sprays of flowers emerge. But as you can see, very vigorous, because it spreads and forms quite a large dome. You get multiple little sprays of these tiny little sort of ivory and green flowers with this lovely subtle scent. So it is not a showstopper of an orchid. I mean, the sublime to the ridiculous in terms of the size of flowers, but it's a curio. And if you like smaller, delicate orchids, you're into miniatures, then maybe this is the one for you. Gomesa Radicans. Quite easy to come by, an interesting flower, but just be warned, the flowers are the size of a small pea. So bear that in mind if you want to add it to your collection. Okay, next cab off our flowering rank is this beauty. Look at that. The most beautiful gold, would we call that? I think we call it gold, with those beautiful sort of mahogany flecks inside the flower. Now this is Brasada Mavada, and I've made a video about this because I bought the plant in bloom years ago, and then it never flowered for me again. And then it did, and then I thought, it's getting quite unwieldy. As you can see, it's a tricky habit. It's one of those sort of plants that wants to climb. So I had to repot it, and it sort of fell apart into two very clean, separate divisions. So I've repotted it separately. One is inside, one is outside. This is the outside one, which immediately sent up a flower spike, and there is a second spike just there, which you can perhaps see. The one inside, not a hint of a flower. So interesting. This is getting cold. Winter minimums, and we've had some really chilly weather at the moment, and look, it's loving life. It is also getting much brighter dappled light outside than the inside one, so I think that's probably the key. It likes brighter dappled light, and it's really responded to that, and it's flowered really quickly for me. So it's flowering from this new growth here, which is, you know, pretty common for many orchids. And so the name of the game is always, of course, vegetative growth and getting new growth points so you can get new flowers. So I think as this is a hybrid, you would find that you might get 2 growth cycles in a year and 2 flowering seasons in a year, which mine certainly has, after years of nothing. So I'm thrilled now that I can kind of add this to my regular flowering repertoire, because it's a beautiful plant, really big flowers, and that sort of goldy tangerine marmalade color, I guess, quite unusual in the orchid world. So it's a lovely thing to have. Brasada Mavada. And it is a hybrid between Brassia aurantiaca and Brassia verrucosa. It's a striking flower, and I think once you get the position right, like many orchids, really easy to flower. And look at that, the most gorgeous strong color. So if you can grow Brassias and you can grow Oncidiums, you'd certainly be able to grow this. And I don't think it's that uncommon. So have a go and just see. The color is stunning. No fragrance, I don't think. No, not a hint of a fragrance, but it's a beautiful flower. Next up, this is a tiny thing that perhaps only a mother could love, but ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Look at that. Now let me get that tag out of the way for you. It's a very strong pink. So this is my Silogyny Fimriata, and look at that little flower there. So I bought this at the Orchid Species Society of Victoria's autumn sale a couple of, well, probably a few months ago now, and it was a bag of clippings, and I'll link that video, you might remember it. So I basically formed a little nest for it in this Vander basket. So I made a layer of coconut fiber, loose coconut fiber, then a layer of mix of sphagnum and bark, placed all of the stems, there's about 3 or 4 stems on that, and then gave it a gentle layer of bark over the top of that, hung it in some bright indirect light outside, and I tried to keep it really moist, and it's basically been flowering ever since. So this is the Alba form, and as you can see, yes, plant lovers, that is pale yellow, not Alba. Anyway, but the aim of the game is to get a ball of this plant. It's very vigorous, very rhizomy, and then you'll get this tangled mass of plant, and it's a very vigorous flower. So you should constantly have a selection of flowers. And what you might notice here is I had 2 flowers here, and it's pollinated. So it's whatever has been able to pollinate it has crossed with itself. So the 2 flowers have probably pollinated each other, which is interesting. So I'm going to let those pods grow, and should I even bother sending them off to someone to get them cultivated? Well, firstly, they have to mature because they're still quite young, but who knows, I might have the most fabulous variety of Silogyny Fimriata. I doubt it, but might be a curious exercise, plant lovers. You very rarely get pods sort of without trying, I think, as an amateur orchid grower. So I'm curious what it was that managed to pollinate this, because as you know, orchids have, I mean, each species has a very distinct symbiotic relationship with its pollinator, some of them incredibly complex and specific. So I'm curious what Australian insect managed to stumble on this to make the magic happen. Anyway, so there we have 2 seed pods forming. There you can see them. So I might let that happen and see how big they get. And then I might ask Michael Coker, who is the president of the Victorian Australian Orchid Council. I forget the title, but anyway, he knows where to send off your orchid pods to get them propagated, so maybe I'll try. Anyway, there we go. Silogyny Fimriata, the Alba version, which is in fact pale yellow, in bloom and kind of has been all the time. Pretty little thing. I have a lot of Silogynies. Most of them are quite flashy and showy. This is by far the simplest, but I think once I build this up into a specimen, it's going to be absolutely beautiful. And then let's see, bonus pods, what happens. Alrighty, the What's in Bloom orchid train continues, and let's slide this little lover over. Look at that. Ta-da, 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 ta-da. Now this might be coarse to move the camera back. There we are. So this, as you probably can tell, is a Laelia, and it's an anceps of some sort, more than likely a hybrid or a variety. Not quite sure. I bought it as a no ID from, where did I get it from? I don't know, to be honest. Isn't that terrible? But I think eBay actually. But look at that. I think Laelias, the flowers are very similar to Cattleyas, obviously, and they've been hybridized to produce all sorts of beautiful things. But if you had to describe an orchid flower, it would look like that, I think, don't you? Stunning flowers. Now, these are a Mexican species and not often described as a cool grower, but once again, I bought a lot of these plants from local growers and they all grow them cold. And in Melbourne, that just means outdoors, undercover, protected, but no heating. So they are getting the cool winter nighttime minimums. And Laelias seem to love it. Not a fragrant orchid. And the flower stem itself can often be much longer than this. I've got another couple that are all in spike at the moment too. They haven't opened yet. But the actual stem can be sometimes a meter long, really tall. And when mine first flowered for the first time, and I'd never flowered a Laelia before, I thought, oh, I'm doing something wrong because the flowers are reaching for the light. But no, that's what they want to do. They just have very, very long stems and they are divine, long-lasting flowers, really beautiful. You can get, there's an Alba form, which I've got as well, which is very pretty. And then there's been lots of hybrids of this, obviously with Cattleyas, but also just the Laelia anceps type. So you can get a variety of colors from quite strong magenta to these, which are sort of a mix of pale pink with magenta all the way down to white. And then there are other species of Laelias as well. But Laelia anceps, I think, is one of the easiest to grow if you're a beginner. The only thing is it does need bright, bright, bright light. And I actually made a bit of a mistake, plant lovers, because I moved mine into stronger light and I actually moved it into strong, direct morning light. But I did it too quickly. And the plants had been in a softer position. I moved them and the leaves got really burnt. In fact, you can still see there's some of the damage on this one here. Happened very quickly. So I moved it obviously, and it's just taken, it takes quite a bit because the leaves last for a long time. So you're reminded of your folly for quite a few years, I have to say. Anyway, so bright indirect light. If you can give it direct light in the morning that's sort of gentle and then bright indirect, that's even better. But if you are moving orchids, do it gently, acclimatize them to their new position because they will kind of go into shock and get burnt quite quickly. So bear that in mind. Otherwise, very easy orchid to grow. It's in a loose mix. I water it quite a lot, but I really dial it down in winter, just after the flowers are finished. But they tend to flower at this time of year for me, late autumn, early winter. So it's a really great dramatic orchid to have in bloom at this time of year when things can start to get a bit miserable weather-wise. Anyway, Laelia anceps. I've got another 2. One is a very strong magenta and one is a pure white. So they're not open yet, but this one is, so I'm showing you. All right, next up is this beauty. Look at that, a little Beallara. Isn't that stunning? No fragrance, but a very, very, very pretty flower. And this is a named variety. This is Beallara Peggy, Ruth, Carpenter, Morning Joy. There we are. And Beallaras are very easy to grow. Nothing special. I've actually made a video, I think a few weeks ago, about one of mine that was in bloom. It was a no ID that I got from a florist because the flower spike had died and the plant was half price. And I didn't know what it was until it flowered. Anyway, this one was a named variety, and isn't it stunning? Now, normally you would have more spikes and more flowers, but mine isn't in the best position. It's outside all year, so it gets those cool winter nighttime minimums as we've discussed, but it is not getting enough bright indirect light, so it will be a little bit more of a vigorous bloomer if I was able to give it the right conditions. But nonetheless, for the time being, it's doing very well. A very, very pretty flower, sort of a very sort of pale, icy white with these lovely splodges of a deep magenta. Very, very pretty. Beallaras are easy, really quite large flowers, often sometimes massive. It's a complex hybrid of many things, but easy to grow and can sometimes flower multiply in the year because the flowers emerge with each new growth as it matures. And so if you can get a couple of growth cycles a year, you'll get a couple of flowerings every year. So there you go. Beallara, Peggy, Ruth, Carpenter, Morning Joy in bloom right now, bringing me joy. Okay, and here we are once again with my lovely, lovely Simbidium, this pendent Simbidium, still in bloom. And it opened a few weeks ago for me. I had 3 spikes, 1 spike has gone over. This was the youngest spike, which is still in beautiful flower. And it's a hybrid Cymbidium. I'm not quite sure of the idea. A few people have some ideas, which I must actually just write down and confirm. But very early for me, so it's late autumn. Now, normally hybrid Cymbidiums for me will start flowering late winter, early spring. A lot of species Cymbidiums flower in autumn. This one is definitely a hybrid anyway. It decided this year to just throw caution to the wind and flower earlier for me, and it's still in bloom. And this is the great thing about Cymbidiums, the flowers last a long time. So this is a pendant sort, so you have sort of a tighter form to the plant and these wonderful pendant racemes of flowers. So great for hanging because then you can look up at the flowers and it looks really wonderful. And some of the pendant ones have very, very long flower spikes. So it's a beautiful thing. So really not quite the season for Cymbidiums. I should have a lot more. I will have a lot more in a few months' time. But this one broke the fence early and decided to flower. And so there we are. It's still in bloom now and it's a gorgeous thing. Okay, and last but not least, look at this. This is an Australian hybrid dendrobium and it's called Dendrobium Gippsland. And I featured this a few times because of various reasons, not least of which it is autumn and Australian dendrobiums tend to flower in late winter, early spring, depends where you are in the country and how warm it is. But this one is quite a complex hybrid and it's got a couple of species in it, one of which is called Dendrobium Gibbon, which is more of a subtropical orchid from Queensland. And that one basically can flower at any point throughout the year. So for me, Dendrobium Gippsland tends to flower in autumn and in spring. So it's fantastic because it joins the ranks of its cousins in spring and you get this amazing display. But again, in autumn, when there sometimes isn't a lot going on that's really bright and beautiful, it bursts into bud and the flowers are enormous on it. It's a really beautiful orchid. No fragrance, as some of the Aussie dendrobiums do, but this one, mine, doesn't anyway. But it's a really gorgeous plant. I've had a lot of new cane growth, which is fantastic because I was bemoaning the fact that it didn't seem to have put on any new growth. But it shot out 3, I think, new canes this year, which are really wonderful. Now, they've matured, but they haven't flowered. So the flowers are all coming from older canes. And as you can see, there's some old canes here which are starting to look a little yellow and desiccated. So I wouldn't be at all surprised perhaps over the next year if they actually start to really desiccate and dry off, in which case you could certainly trim them off because I've got a ton of new growth sort of towards the back of the plant. So there we are, Dendrobium Gippsland, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 spikes. I had 5, but again, like the Zygopetalum, something nibbled the side of the spike as it was emerging. Not sure if that was a slug or a snail. Could well have been because this plant is actually on the ground. So there you go. The perils of having things outside, plant lovers, but nonetheless, the other spikes managed to make it. And the good thing is too, they tend to mature at slightly different points. So you'll usually have at least 2 spikes open and then one's going over as another one's opening. So I often get 2 months worth of blooming out of Dendrobium Gippsland, a sensational Aussie hybrid. It's a mix of all the usual suspects, I think, Kingianum, Speciosum, Tetragonum, I think, and Gibbon. There might be one more. Anyway, quite complex. So It's a big flower with amazing colour and this tendency to flower twice a year, which makes it quite unusual in the Aussie Dendrobium realm. Well, there we are, plant lovers. There is my whiz through what's in bloom autumn this year. Ah, there was one other. Ta-da, ta-da, I forgot because it's not here. Outside is my Epidendrum. Now, this is an orchid rescue that I got from my late mother-in-law's collection. It had been left outside and basically abandoned for sort of, the odd 16 to 18 years since she died. So tough as nuts, let me just say, Epidendrums. And as you can see, mine is a classic orange one. I imagine she probably got hers in the late 80s, early 90s when orchid growing started to be a bit more of a thing in Australia. So it could even be the species, who knows, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a pretty thing. And you see these very commonly in Australia, almost growing weedily. Easy to propagate. You can literally snap a bit off, stick it in a pot of bark and off it will go. Mine gets direct sun. They can be in direct sun all day. The leaves won't look great, but it will certainly flower. Mine gets afternoon protection, but they do like a lot of strong sun. And I've seen them grown as almost hedges here, which was amazing. I once went to someone's house and he had a row of them along the path as you went up to the front door of the house. So you passed through this sort of bower of epidendrums in different colors, pinks, oranges, reds, really quite beautiful. Anyway, that one's outside, loving life, as you can see, several flower spikes. It's in a tangled mess. That's going to be quite an issue to move when we move, which is approaching-ish anyway. So there we are. We now really have finished our ramble through what's in bloom. And as the weather is getting a bit chilly, it's just lovely to have all these things in bloom. And I'm particularly thrilled about Zygopetalum being in bloom. I'm thrilled about Brasada Mavada being in bloom. And I'm really thrilled that this little Silogyny Fimriata has decided that it's loving life. It's growing madly. It's sending out new shoots and it's flowering pretty constantly. So there we are. Lots of interesting things for us to keep our eyes on. And plant lovers, if you want to keep your eyes on anything here, you'll have to hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday. So if you want to know what I'm doing next week, do that and hit the notification bell and you'll know exactly when my missives ping into the YouTube ether. Other than that, I hope all's well in your world, your orchids are behaving well, and I very much look forward to seeing you next week.